Pushpesh Kumar. He teaches sociology at the University of Hyderabad. He edited Sexuality, Abjection and Queer Existence in Contemporary India and co-edited a forthcoming special volume on queer and trans community building in post-NALSA and post-377 India for the Community Development Journal OUP. He was a British Academy visiting fellow at the Department of Anthropology, LSE London in 2009. As a pro-feminist thinker, he has contributed to a special volume on men and feminism in India. He is co-editing Sociology of Gender, Contemporary Perspectives. He was a recipient of M.N. Srinivas Memorial Prize for Young Sociologists in 2007. Thank you.
Welcome everyone here, and today we are going to have a conversation with Parmesh Shahani, the author of two books. One is Gay Bombay and another is Queeristan, right? And a very brief introduction. Is very well known and he doesn't need introduction as such, but Parmesh Shahani is a Master of Science in Comparative Media Studies from MIT, US, and presently heads new experimental project called the Godrej DEI Lab, which aims to empower inclusion ecosystem within as well as outside the Godrej industry limited and associate company groups. He has authored two books, as I said, and I'll read the full title: Gay Bombay, Globalization, Love and Belonging in Contemporary India, from Sage publication, and Queeristan, LGBT Inclusion in Indian Workplace in 2020, and that is published from West End Publisher. The second book received C.K. Prahlad Award for Best Business Book of 2021 and Lardley Award for Gender Sensitivity in 2021. There is a lot more which one can get to see on www.parmesh.net. I end the introduction here, and we will talk about the book, and I have some questions, few questions, which you will be sort of reflecting on.
Thank you.
You will be answering.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you're talking about in this book, and you're also advocating corporate as an empowering space for LGBT communities through demonstrating the steps taken by, or specifically by Godrej, Tatas, and a few others. These are success stories about how LGBT persons can experience inclusion in their workplaces if the companies where they work are willing to accept them and try engaging with their specific needs and problems. What do you think are the challenges in other corporate groups replicating the models?
So thank you, Pushpesh. Thank you to HLF for having me here and for having a session at this incredibly diverse festival, highlighting queer issues and queer workplace issues as well. To answer your question, I think it's not been easy, because Queeristan is the journey of about 20 years of, in a sense, workplace activism to somehow bring forward LGBTQ inclusions into conversations. For so many years before that, in workplaces, when people thought of diversity and inclusion, it was mostly gender. And this is the reality all over the world, in different parts of the world. There are different frameworks or different areas that people look at when they think of inclusion. In the US or Western Europe, where, even in India, but more so in those spaces where race is a large axis of differentiation, people think of inclusion besides gender in terms of racial diversity, for example. And in India, there are so many other dimensions, all of which intersect with each other, but for so many years it was gender that was being looked at. And so most organizations, even today, when they think about how do we create a more inclusive organization, they think how do we bring more women into the workplace as well. So it was very challenging to bring forward LGBTQ, as it has been challenging for people who are working on the inclusion of persons with disabilities, or age, or region, or caste, or religious minorities, and there are so many other manifestations of that make us who we are. But there is in terms of what organizations are willing to do and what organizations are unwilling to do. So it was very challenging, but within that, some of the lessons we realized is that if we can frame inclusion in India of LGBTQ people within the narrative that this is it's not an alien Western thing that we are bringing in from other parts of the world. It's very deep rooted in who we are as a people and so on. It becomes easier, which is why it was important that early success stories come from, say, homegrown companies. As much as we love Google or Apple or anyone else, the moment they say that LGBTQ inclusion, it becomes easy for critics to say, oh, this is something that has come from other parts of the world. But when a Tata Steel or when a Godrej or when an Indian company which has been rooted, say, for more than 100 years here, when they talk about it, it becomes very easy to convince the fence sitters, the naysayers, the people who don't think for others. So I think to answer your question, the first challenge has been in convincing people that this is really, really important. And the second is actually saying, how do you move from intent to action? Even if you believe it's important, you need to sensitize people, you need to hire more people, you need to think about products, you need to include people in your advertising and representation. And all of this is a journey that people go on. So A is, how do you convince people that this is important enough to discuss? And B is then, how do you say, beyond discussing, what steps are you going to take to make it a reality? So both of these have been incredibly challenging, but also incredibly exciting and rewarding. And we've had a lot of victories along the way and a whole lot of disappointments as well. But it's been a fun ride. It's been a fun ride.
Thank you. Thank you, Parmesh. You talk a lot about inclusion and diversity. How do we imagine inclusion given the diverse positioning of community in caste, class, gender, sexuality, age, and as you said, ability and disabilities, rural, urban, and all these factors in different permutations and combinations mediate the existence of different members of the community. How does a corporate group accommodate diverse needs of different LGBT employees, for example?
Yeah. So first of all, most corporations in India are not looking at all dimensions. It's hard enough. It's been very challenging for years to get people to even focus on gender. And then some other manifestation it's what many of us have been struggling for years as well. So we all might get, because we are in this incredibly safe and comfortable and liberal echo chamber of intersectional understandings, but most people who are in the workplaces or whatever, might not have an understanding of intersectionality as the various dimensions that, define us and how it is at these intersections that we are formed. Most people think very much in terms of just binary distinctions and so on, right? So what does it mean to get people into it? I don't know. So the arguments I've used for the sake of this book that I continue to use now when I work, say, in my organization, as well when I advise others, is my simple strategies. I do whatever it takes to convince people. So if it means doing an item number, I'll do an item number. It means telling people data, showing people data, I will show people data. If it means emotionally taking them on a journey where I talk about, amping up the emotion so that one solitary tear comes down their face, I will do that. I'll do whatever it takes, because what is at stake are jobs, livelihoods, and futures of my queer brethren. So in terms of numbers, what I've used is I've done, and you've read the book, so we've used various data from all over the world to talk about how inclusion of any category, but the book is about LGBTQ, makes financial sense. So there's a $5 trillion global economy, there's like a $200 billion Indian economy, there's enough data. I mean, we're in a place like Satwa Knowledge Park where companies like Deloitte, McKinsey, BCG and all exist. And many of these companies have done the research to show that when you are inclusive, your innovation potential goes up 8 times. So there's enough data. And of course, there's now every company is chasing millennial, Gen Z, the next one after Gen Z. What are they called? Alpha? Whatever. They're like, yeah, Alpha, right? Are you Gen Alpha? Okay. Gen Z? So old. Okay. So there's whoever it after that, right? Everyone is saying that there's now enough data that says that, young people, whether they're LGBTQ, straight, whatever, they want to work in organizations in which are friendly. So there's a lot of data that we can draw into to use as arguments saying that there's no downside, there's only an upside. What do you do? But data often isn't enough. So what I use in the book as well as in my workplace practices, I use stories. I use emotions. I bring queer people and their families and talk. It's what I've called in the book as cultural acupuncture, saying that how do you understand where to put pressure and what to put pressure on. And one of the things I've realized after years of doing this is that the where to put pressure is on the idea of family. So whether people are in the workplaces or not, we are very rooted to the idea of family in India. So how can we make them understand in two ways that family is a locus of change. How do we make them understand? So they may not understand the data of there are so many queer people in India, we have to do this. But I'll tell them, tomorrow what if your daughter comes out as lesbian? How would you want her to live in an India in which so and so? I bring other queer people, I bring queer young people and their parents and tell their stories to them. Not just stories of, say, oppression and tragedy, but stories of parents who have lovingly accepted their children and then they are flourishing. Stories of possibility, stories of parents who have started parent groups like Swikar. So I'm saying, so the way I've framed my argument in the book and I do is I do a mixture of data, I do a mixture of storytelling, I do whatever it takes to get organizations to kind of shift their mindsets so that they can open their wallets, loosen their purse strings and put some of their resources towards programs, efforts, etc., to advance inclusion. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So inclusion can be looked at in two different ways. One is formal inclusion by extending recognition and certain rights to different marginalized groups. Another is substantive inclusion, and substantive inclusion which entitles access to economic and infrastructural resources. Where do you place the corporate? It might mean, but if you are talking about structural issues, if you're talking about access to resources and infrastructural issues, it would mean structural changes and transformation. Yeah. Structural changes might mean redistribution of income and wealth. But do you see corporates are really committed towards that?
No, not at all. Far from. And so where we are in terms of substantive inclusion, the way you have defined it is very little, zero, almost. Yeah. So, and I write in the beginning of Queeristan, I say that I'm arguing from a position of extreme marginality. I'm someone who's kind of on the margins, who's kind of been let into the corporate world somehow. But I don't think that one has any power of anything. One just is able to kind of have a foot into this door and say, okay, what can we widen the door a little bit? And this is what all of us who are working in this space are trying to do, right? I mean, how do we reimagine capitalism? I mean, that's a great project. I mean, whether it's Piketty, whether so many others have done it, there are no answers. And can we reimagine capitalism to be more, can we come up with a system that is better, more humane, etc.? Of course. I mean, capitalism, the way it stands is fundamentally flawed. But I mean, so no one is thinking about this as well in the workplace in India. I don't think there are people thinking about it in the workplace in other parts of the world. I must say that there are organizations in other parts of the world which are committed to the idea of justice a little more. For example, but one doesn't know, is it a reaction to immediate events? For example, after Black Lives Matter in the US, after the street protests, many organizations suddenly said, we will devote 1% of our profit to, say, historically disadvantaged communities and groups and so on. I would like to see 4 years down the line, have they done it, have they not? Was it performative, was it not? Who knows? Or is it business as usual, stock market is booming, some people are becoming whatever, right? So I'm not seeing what you are imagining as substantive happening anywhere in the world. But my funda is that until that happens, until we imagine a truly substantively better world for everyone, in the interim, we've got to kind of squeeze through in what we have and trying to make a difference in what we have. And so I'm trying to do it from where I am, recognizing completely the futility of it in the larger scheme of things. We're also saying to get from here to there, someone will have to do this middle of the road kind of work.
Okay.
So yeah, and that gives me a lot of despair on a daily basis.
Yes. As you get quote Grace Bano, the first trans engineer and leader of Dalit transgender community. But Grace claims that despite qualifications, Dalits are not welcome in the corporate jobs. You also mentioned that, I think. If you look at the configuration of LGBT employees in the corporate, that is, what is the representation of Dalit, Adivasis, and these sets of, people, members of these communities? They may be placed as cleaners and manual laborers doing manual jobs. In such instances, how they would experience inclusion? If some queer people are also belonging to these groups and placed at the lower rung of the hierarchy within the corporate, do you think that inclusion is possible for these entities at the same time? Because I know from, because I taught a course on digital sociology, and I know that even America, in the US, the corporates are excluding, they're preferring Indians because India is a big market, but they are excluding blacks and Latinos. So what do you think if people from these communities, what kind of inclusion, if they are trans or queer, is possible for them?
So I think this is so the private sector, it's challenging here. And I mean, Suraj was here yesterday, right? Suraj Yengde, and in Caste Matters, he's done, it's 10 years old, I think it's still relevant. He's done some incredible work on just looking at representation, say at board level, of Dalit participation, and it is minuscule if not non-existent. I think it's very challenging in the world in which I operate, which is the corporate world, because most companies have stopped looking at caste-based data in terms of that. So there is no data. At least most companies that I know, I mean, in the public sector, there is data, but in the private sector, most companies are not maintaining data, and when one asks, are refusing to actually start measuring. So it's very, very challenging. But it's not to say that one cannot weave in, and that's what an intersection lens is, what I call jugaad resistance. One cannot weave other dimensions in through things like gender or through things like LGBTQ, etc., which is also where there is data and which is where one works on. So my go around to this has been, like, I figure out where things are possible, and I enter there, and then I try to widen the space as well. Okay. But there is, I mean, there is, in terms of, say, caste, in private workplaces, I have not found, and I've been looking at talking to other corporations, etc. I don't know any company which is actually maintaining data. In the narrative is very much, we don't, this is not a dimension that we ask people about in the private sector. So it makes it challenging then to like measure and to count.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we look at queer community in India, I have been working on Kothis and talking to them in the smaller cities of Maharashtra. They don't even know what is Nalsa verdict. They have no knowledge about, they have no clue about it, and they're busy in sex work, earning, sending remittance to their family back home. But in contrast, we have very elite, urban, high class, upper caste, corporate K, who even got married in the presence of Section 377, and you also mentioned that, which you also mentioned, and how these two classes come together and experience corporate entitlements in certain ways. Do you think it is possible in a corporate space? Like Alok Gupta, if you know Alok,
yeah, very well.
In his chapter, in a book called Because We Have a
English
Voice.
Purki Kothi, English Purki Kothi.
So he wrote English Purki Kothi, and he's talking about two different classes of queers, and the worlds are so different, and these subaltern Kothis are calling the elite English-speaking effeminate gay men as English Purki Kothi, as you said. So in the existence of this kind of disparities within the community itself, do you think that corporatization is something which is the answer?
No, I don't think corporatization of anything is the answer. But I know that we live in a world in which neoliberal capitalism is the reality.
Yeah.
So it's not an ideal at all. And if you think there's just only two kinds of queer people, no, I mean, there are like, we have like hundreds of divisions in our communities, and we are always fighting, arguing, challenging, pushing all the multiple others to be better and to do better. In that way, I think the queer community, with all our challenges and all our friction, is actually a good role model for, say, the non-queer community, because despite all our challenges and all our extreme inequalities, we do, in times of need or crisis, come together, stand up for each other and help each other, unlike, I would say, non-queer people or spaces, which often don't as well. So completely agree with you that, the queer world is as much a place of conflict and as much a place of, say, class and other kinds of divisions as the non-queer world. I don't think it's a question of corporate versus non-corporate. I think it's a question of just all of us in society understanding, questioning, reframing our privileges and looking at the other in a way in which one can engage and transcend some of these. Versus, and will a lot of this happen only in the workplace? Of course not. It has to happen in workplace, it has to happen in homes, in families, and in our own consciousness and morality, right? Is it a project that workplaces should take up? No. I'm okay if workplaces take up the simple project of saying, how can we create infrastructure and facilities for more and more people to be included and thrive? And how can we create more jobs? How can we create less inequality? How can we create products that serve us? And how can we create communication that shows us? If we can get more and more people to do some of this, it'll be a small victory, I'll be happy. Structural transformation, all of that I think is an ideal, which I would love. But at 47, I feel like if in the next 20, 30 years we do some of this also, I'll be quite, I'll feel like my life hasn't been a complete
Sure, because when during COVID times, you can get to see that where trans communities were fighting for their basic needs, roti, kapra or makan or whatever, food to eat, then the privileged queers were asking for civil rights. They were asking for marriage, they were asking for adoption, they were asking for many other things, banking and partnership, something, how to inheritance, how to pass property, etc. And there was no communication between the two groups.
No, here I would actually beg to differ. I think there's been lots of communication. First of all, it's not two groups. I think it's,
Multiple.
it's also a binary understanding. I think the queer world, like other worlds, we live in a world of circularity and interconnected nodes. Okay. So I don't think it is A versus B. And this versus thing is also, I think it's useful, but I don't think I think it's simplistic, right? So I think even in COVID, there were many people from across different groups mobilizing, dissipating, helping, non-helping. So I think if we imagine a world of, and that's why the title Queeristan, if we imagine a world of abundance, a world of incredible opportunities for everyone, then why not imagine a world in which all of us can want marriage rights, and all of us can want not to go hungry in a pandemic, and all of us can want, why should we reduce our desires to just one or two things? Why can't our desires be all of the above? Is my question. And in that, I mean, and I write about this as well towards the end of Queeristan, I witnessed incredible resilience in COVID. I witnessed people helping each other in wonderful ways across some of these divides that actually had not witnessed very often in the years, say, leading up to the pandemic. So while the pandemic did accentuate differences, it also showed us ways in which people can actually connect and transcend some of these as well. So I wouldn't agree with you in the sense of the pandemic, created like more differences, say, between elite queers and non-elite queers. So to me, that's not even the question. To me, the question is how do we create a world in which all of us can dream bigger and have better. So that's the funda that I try and work with,
Sure. You talk about Baba Sahab Ambedkar in the context of 2009 Delhi High Court judgment on same-sex love and same-sex relations that was being decriminalized in Delhi, but not Dalit queers asking for horizontal reservation, right? So and they are claiming Ambedkar, right? So Ambedkar is quoted in one context, but Ambedkar also belonged to a community, and Dalit queers are also associating themselves with Ambedkar, and they're asking for horizontal reservation. Does the corporate ready for such, time and again I'm coming to, such affirmative policies, like your
So I don't
guardrails
think,
or
yeah.
something?
So in the book, I quote Akhil Kang, who's now finishing up.
Yeah.
They are finishing their PhD at Cornell,
Cast
which they don't like very much. They don't like Cornell very much. Where they talk about how, in a sense, queer rights are a legacy of Baba Saheb, as is so much of the progressive action, say in our country at this point. So in the book, I cite Akhil to actually talk about some of the context setting around this. The book was written in 2018 to it was 2018, 2019, and a lot of Grace's work on, say, horizontal reservations actually come up after that. It's come up in 21, 22 as well. So while the book doesn't touch upon horizontal reservations as itself, I think even Grace was thinking through some of this between 2019, 2020, and only articulated it fully in 2021. Do I think? No, I think the public sector would have to lead in this. So I think public sector, state governments, and what's interesting in India, there's one machhar which keeps on hovering over here. I think I should not have eaten that second brownie because now it's come to me. Yeah, so I think I think in terms of this, the public sector enterprises and I would say progressive state governments would have to lead. So I love how Grace has framed the argument for horizontal reservations. I don't think it will succeed in the corporate sector, which in any case is tentative and iffy while talking. But I think I think the public sector, which anyway has so many more jobs and is so much more aspirational for large parts of. If someone has a racket and wants to come and whack it, but not my face, that would be nice. It might be like make for an Instagram story also. No, so I think the public sector or states are where this would succeed more than it would in the private sector, is my understanding of it. But I love the way Grace has framed it. I think it's brilliant. Yeah.
Okay. You say on page 23 that everything becomes better when you come out, right? But as we know that many cross-dressing trans persons are already always out, yet face stigma and discrimination. Their hypervisibility leads to inescapable violence. Simultaneously, it is not easier for many people, particularly working class, to come out, queer to come out. So what way you think that coming out sometimes is also argued is a very elitist kind of
No, of course,
idea.
and completely. And I, when I write that, I quote. I'm actually quoting Sir Ian McKellen. It's not something that I had said. It's something that Sir Ian McKellen, Gandalf or Magneto to some of the younger people in the audience, Shakespearean legend to some older. There's no older people in this audience. Oh, yeah, Sir Ian McKellen for us, like Gandalf, Magneto to you, is something that he told me. Yeah, I spent 2 days with Sir Ian McKellen, and there was a moment at the Taj where he leaned over to me and I'm not going to tell you more. Read the book to find out. So in the book, that's where I talk about what he's narrated his journey to me, and he had spent years being closeted, and then he told me that, listen, Parmesh, everything becomes better. It's certainly something that since I came out and it was relatively easier, I have. But I've not. In fact, even in the book, I don't, I argue very much, I say don't come out if you cannot. I'm very pragmatic that way. I mean, I think if you need to, and it's also what I advise people, I'm like, if you're living with parents and your parents are going to pay for education, let them finish paying for it first. Do whatever it takes, right? I mean, because ultimately, who knows how people are going to react. So the caveat is, if you can afford to, of course, and some people can afford to more than others, and you want to come out and you think that the downside is limited, is it better? Yeah. And I'm not saying this, data says this. There's enough data that says that if you come out at work, and people have done this in other parts of the world, your 30%, your productivity goes up by about 30%. And why is that? Because you're not spending a lot of your time hiding who you are at work, you're just doing your work. Versus, like if you're closeted, if you're whatever, spending a lot of time in in not wanting people to know something which is so vital about you. So all the data says that when you come out, it's liberating, you're more productive, you're happier and all of that. But as you rightly said, who can afford to come out? So my argument has always been, and my advice to everyone is, only do it if you can. Certainly don't, like, hero nahi banne ka.
So it is like
Do it
a
if-
strategic coming out.
It's
Yeah.
strategic, yeah, everything. Like as queer people, our life is only one strategy. Yeah? Every time we're thinking, do we do, what to do, what not to, where to be. And this is why straight people just amble through life, you know, not thinking about anything. So the burden is incredible, right? It's also why so many queer people are like, no, I'm not going to go there. I was going to say like,
True.
smarter, cleverer, cuter, all of that, because we do all the work. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So any corporate or business is based on profit and privilege profit over justice, right? So does the idea of justice or inclusion would mean a kind of Disneyfication of democracy? That democracy is Disneyfied, include everyone, right? You know, you're quoting the sociologist Dipankar Gupta, and Dipankar has talked about democracy and inclusion, and he says that, you know, the size of national cake is shrinking, but everybody is extended rights. So you also come, you are also formally recognized, you are also formally recognized, and then make it very simplistic, you know, and there is, the national cake is very shrunken, and there are lot many eaters. So there is no resources, but you are Disneyfying the democracy, making it very simplistic, making it very, it's very complicated, it needs structural transformation, etc. But you just include, and some tokenism is being done. So how do you
So I've not read this new work of Dipankar where he talks about this. So as I said earlier, I mean, you know, does democracy, does capitalism, do all these things, does the UN, I mean, do organizations and frameworks with which the world has run need to be rethought? Of course. But my work is in the here and now and in the short to mid-term. So while that is being done, my aim is how do we get some more of us in and happier. So in that context, I don't think, I mean, as I like Disney, I don't like, but Disneyfication is something else. I don't think that the work that we've been doing is small or should not be considered serious. You know, one of the companies at Godrej Properties, a real estate company, 3 years ago they had maybe 3 or 4 trans people working. Today there are about 140 trans people working in it. Is it a drop in the larger scheme of things? Yes. But for those 140 trans people who come to work, who are respected and who are loved and who go home and have livelihoods, and then who can imagine a better future along. I mean, I was with one of our trans colleagues 2 days ago before I came, and she's being posted to the North Zone, and she was really happy. So I think within the larger scheme of things, there's a lot to be reimagined. But in the small to mid-term, I mean, I think some of the successes that we've had within workplaces using some of these are also important. I mean, what is it? I think that 100 or 140 lives are important for the 140 people and our families. And that's a little bit of what we're trying to do. We would like these 140 to be 280 and then 300 and then 400. I have not, again, maybe I read a particular kind of literature because I wanted to write a particular kind of book, but I've not read any literature that says that when you include more and more people into workplaces, people's profits go down or anything. In fact, everything that I've read seems to point to when there are more women on boards, for example, boards take better decisions. When there are more diverse boards, companies can make better products or whatever, right? Now, maybe I'm not reading the literature that talks about alternative to corporates or this kind of organization. But everything that I've read in the past few seems to point that, I mean, being inclusive, at least within the system, is good. And I'm like I've been going with that for the past few years. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Um, like I'll talk more about corporate and how corporates are also very exploitative if you look at certain perspective, and we call it gig economy or platform economy. The employees at lower levels such as delivery boys are paid low and their job is always precarious. Now they have invented a new nomenclature. They don't call them workers. They call them partner or some other nomenclature, right? And as a workers, people have right to collectivize, do collective bargaining for better deal, etc. But when you call them as partner or something, and it's very contractual, they don't get to see each other, they don't gather at one place, etc. And they're very fragmentized, and they cannot collectivize and bargain for their rights. How you have made it possible for trans and queer community to come together and ask for their rights or some entitlements, and that has been possible. What are strategies you have personally deployed? Yeah.
So it's not just me. I mean, there's many organizations. So again, Queeristan is a story of so many companies, all of which have done different things. I think there are many progressive organizations in India which have certainly do full-time employees get more benefits than contractual employees, of course. But now I think it is mandated in so many places, and so many organizations voluntary up the benefits for consulting or contractual employees as well. How have we made it possible? I think given how hierarchical, decision making is in general, whether it's in politics, whether it's in business, whether it's in families, and so on. I think one of the things that over the past 20 years that has worked is in taking the case for inclusion top downwards. Just by saying that if the MD or if senior leaders or if people who are in position of power understand that being inclusive is to their advantage, then they will be more inclined to either adopt their hiring practices or change their benefits or go and do outreach and so on in a way, as opposed to building a case bottom upwards. So one of the things has been really taking it top downwards. The second, as I told you earlier, is combining a very data-based argument with emotional storytelling and so forth. The third is by running experiments that have worked. In so many cases, like say in organizations and companies, right? I mean, companies are chasing business, profits, and so on. In these cases, arguing for inclusion in some ways, say trans inclusion, for example, right? One of the ways that many organizations, whether it's companies like Tata Steel, whether it's so many others have done onboarding internships, saying that we will do a combination of training and then having the talent work with us, for example. Okay. So many people might not. So Godrej Properties, for example, has a transgender and real estate program, which is like a 6-month program where members from the trans community come learn about the real estate business and then can choose to be absorbed in or maybe not, and then go work with other companies. So there's a lot of work that has gone into this, but I think the crux is in organizations understanding it's to their advantage and then empowering, say, their teams to go try some of these experiments. And when they succeed, then they're replicated, then other companies can do so and so on. And if they don't succeed for whatever reason, then so be it.
Yeah, but time and again, I'm pushing you because
Yeah.
I'm a sociology person, and we have to critically look at corporate also.
Yeah.
So if you look at corporate structure, basically, and their modus operandi, their history, their foundation, everything, you will see that they do a lot of human rights violations. They engage in a lot of injustices. For example, they take, like if you talk about software companies, they take your private data without your consent. You're not giving consent to it. You might have heard of Cambridge Analytica case, where the Facebook data were taken without the consent of people, and these people were targeted in favor of Trump or something, So lot of environmental hazards they're posing, right? They're evading taxes right? And there's massive tax benefits that every state is giving to corporate. They're also violating rule of laws, many corporate in their own country as well as in the context of transnational context. So given this kind of background, it is very difficult for us to imagine justice in a larger framework within the corporate. That is possible, you know. So how do you react to it? I mean, I'm just
I can't
provoking you
speak
to-
for all of corporate India. I'm a person, I have a job in a company, I'm trying to do something in it. And I've just happened to have written a book about some of those experiences and some of those attempts. So I mean, if now listening to you, I'm feeling very like, oh God, what am I doing? Should I even go back? Should I leave my job?
Yeah.
But then what? Some of us have to work within these systems. Some of us have to find answers. I'm sure we can imagine a world in which some companies are not doing all of these things, in which some companies are maybe just paying their employees and producing goods and services and trying to whatever. I mean, certainly I feel lucky to be working for one of those groups which is in that space as well. But I mean, it's kind of overwhelming to think about all the challenges in the world. And I'm sure we look at any other form of organization, like academia in which you are in. Maybe let's look at some of the challenges in academia. Is it perfect? Do professors get promoted? Ideally, is there no politics? Where do universities get their money from? I mean, you know, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer to your question. But if you are asking me, if your question is, how do I feel like not overwhelmed or like not depressed? I eat 2 pieces of dark chocolate every night. And I watch Govinda movies just to keep me a little bit of, just to keep me a little sane so that I can go back to my job and try and do the best in whatever way I can. Sure. If I look at the larger structures of oppression, which I feel we must, and which is I'm so glad that you are in a university examining all of this, then perhaps we can work. So I think, so to take your argument a little bit ahead, I think what might be useful is if in some of this critical understanding and questioning might seep into, where corporations or businesses or workplaces get some of their training from. And I know this because I'm trained as a humanist, but now I work in a business space, right? A lot of the people who work in business spaces come from an engineering or MBA background where they don't have this language of even seeing or understanding the world. So they cannot understand that, they cannot understand that the way they might be seeing each other or the land or society at large might be problematic. So if one has to come up with a way, I think more humanities and business schools and engineering colleges might be useful so that people who are doing this, which is where the pipeline to say workplaces is from, people can actually critically engage and understand some of this. And vice versa, more strategy, project management, execution in the humanities from say engineering and businesses so that people in the humanities can also, at MIT we used to call it applied humanities. So I think perhaps starting from there might be useful to get people who are then able to actually talk to each other. Because right now, it's very hard for some of my colleagues to even understand me when I talk to them, right, in the workplace. And I've been working there for so many years as well, right? So I think maybe if we start a little earlier in training from undergrad level onwards, just more conscious and holistic people, that might help. But I don't have any grand answer.
True.
And I refuse to be depressed because I have 2 pieces of dark chocolate every day.
Yeah, so you talk about Supreme Court, right? And you're praising Supreme Court for 2 landmark judgments, Nalsa and Navtej Singh Johar, right? Yeah. But recently, as you see that Supreme Court has also refused marriage equality, and given a verdict which is not very good to the queer community. Many of them would like to marry and all. And Menaka Guruswamy is also saying that we are a marriage society. So at one point, Supreme Court is taking Menaka Guruswamy very seriously. At another point, not. So how do you see these contradictions of the Supreme Court?
I see this in a large timeline of victories and non-victories or opportunities to like have future victories. I mean, where after 2009, did we ever think that 2013 would come? Right, after 2009, Delhi High Court gave this verdict. So many of us were like, we are free, we are free. 2013, suddenly we are not. Then 2018 came, then 2019 came a problematic Trans Act. Then this has come. So I think the law goes, the arc of justice goes forward, but not linear. Back and forth in various ways.
Yeah.
What I would like to see, so I mean, will there be future petitions? Of course. Will there be future benches? Of course. Will some verdicts go our way? Almost certainly. Will we lose some cases? Of course. Should we be making these cases in the first place? I don't know. Again, like, should we be in court arguing for our rights as citizens? I don't know, but chalo, I mean, this is the reality, right? So how do I feel? I feel hope and despair, both together. But I'm always like more towards, hope. What do I think should...
5 minutes.
What should I think should accompany some of the legal change is what I'm working on, which is why the book Queeristan. I really feel that while the courts take their own time and go back and forth, we, all of us, like people here are in colleges, are in offices, we are all families. I think this is the time for all of us to actually have this dialogue within ourselves and within those that matter. I would like our institutions, whether it is homes and families, whether it's workplaces and so on, to become spaces of inclusion as well, so that by the time the courts next catch up to us, it will more be like a matter of almost like a formality rather than something. Because when all of us together are, I know it's idealistic, but are loving and treating each other better and are including each other and imagining worlds in which all of us have the same rights, then the court verdicts are a question of recognizing the change which is already taking place instead of leading it. So I think we all have a lot of work to do in civil society at large by the time this struggle goes next. Was I disappointed by the recently? Of course. I mean, I'm disappointed by any court verdict which doesn't give us the same rights. And are the rights problematic? Of course. But just as straight people have the problematic right to marry, queer people should also have it. And then we should question and talk about how problematic it is. But right now it's a case of Sag rapes because we don't have it and we are debating it. I want to have it. And then I want to cry also, Ayo, now queer divorce. It was so much easier before. But I would really want the right and then, complain about it. And marriage is just one. I mean, there's so many other things that we want to do. But until that comes about, I would really like to see some of us pushing these other institutions ahead. I mean, that's where I am.
Yeah, we are running sort of time. So one last question, that you're talking about LGBTQ in your book, but I hardly see you have defined, sort of given an understanding about intersex people.
Yeah.
And I think intersex are the most marginalized communities within LGBTQI or plus, whatever we talk about. So they have their specific health needs, they have their specific needs, etc. But do you come across intersex people in corporate, and whether their specific needs are also talked about, discussed, considered, or what?
Yeah, so in the book, intersex is spoken about in terms of the law, in terms of health. But in the research for my book, like rightly, there are way more gay men than lesbian, there are way more trans women than trans men in workplaces. So while the book tried to look at workplaces, it was skewed more towards the people which, spoke to me and which exist. The infrastructure ready, they are ready. So that groundwork is being done. But absolutely right, just as in society and within our queer community as well, it is not as much in the foreground as it should be. So yeah.
Thank you. So we should open up to the question answer.
Maybe one mic over there and like y'all can share it. Yeah, there and maybe.
Hello, I'm Anjana. I wanted to understand how typecasting would work in the corporate world. Like, I understand the kind of typecasting which transgender people face when they are, say, doctors, for instance, that you're forced into emergency medicine or look after the HIV ward, right? So I don't know if there is an equivalent at all, and I hope there isn't, but I just was curious to know if that is something which happens in the corporate world, a certain kind of typecasting.
You mean like stereotyping of queer people? And,
Yeah.
Like in what context? Just give me a...
In terms of their ability to do certain kinds of jobs over, privileging certain kinds of job roles over others.
No, I've not encountered that. I've not encountered that as such. No, it's like in factories, people say it's a heavy plant. Would a woman be able to operate that machine? In that kind of typecasting, are you talking about?
So to speak, yeah, I suppose. So
Yeah.
The example I did bring up was a trans woman doctor in Telangana I know was more than eligible to become a gynecologist, and she wasn't given that option, right? So that's something I was.
So that is then discrimination in
Yeah.
that sense of whatever,
Yeah.
yeah. So discrimination we see a lot of all across.
in job roles.
Yeah, discrimination we see a lot of because of ignorance, because of homophobia and all of that all across, but not linked to typecasting. Linked, yeah, is it linked to their sexual orientation, LGBTQI? Yes, that comes across all across. It's not linked to them being typecast for any particular, it's just, I mean, homo and transphobia, so they're everywhere. So the discrimination comes to that, but it's not really linked to them doing any particular kind of role, you know?
Okay.
I mean, do I face homophobia in my workplace? I mean,
that I was-
we all do in various ways, you know, microaggressions, macroaggressions, all of that comes to all the time. But I don't think it's linked to you performing a certain kind of role.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
We can take one more question. Yeah.
Ayo, can we take two more quickly? We started late.
Hi, my name is Nandini. So I wanted to ask about, you were talking about, so corporate, like being queer in corporate, right? So for example, where I work, the company's stance is very pro-LGBTQ, but obviously in the office, there's plenty of people who don't share that view, which is natural. So if you were to say defend the LGBTQ community in a group setting, it's practically outing yourself because it's not the common stance of the average employee. So would you say that queer people in corporate, considering that we are relatively privileged as compared to the average queer person because you have a job, you have a source of income, you're educated, right? Do you think that we have a responsibility to do that, to out ourselves, to defend our community? Secondly, so you were talking about how diversity and inclusion generally up to this point has been about women. And so yes, there's a lot of hiring drives specifically for women. That's a very common thing now. And that has created this impression, particularly in, say, my age group, that, oh, women have an unfair advantage when it comes to being hired. They have an unfair advantage. Incapable women are getting hired. So say if a similar thing was implemented for queer people. First of all, wouldn't it create the same effect? And secondly, wouldn't it demand outing yourself to get a job?
Both are very good. I wish I had a gift. What good questions these are. To answer your first question, I think you don't have to do anything. You just, keep yourself alive, keep yourself happy, keep your job going. That's all. Anything besides that is a bonus. Do it if you feel like. The onus should be on your organization to feel safe, not on you to be doing all this extra labor of educating. Should I out? Should I not? Straight people are not like teaching and training other people or whatever. This burden, straight people are not thinking, should I come out as straight or not? The queer person is thinking about all of this. So you don't have to do any extra labor if you don't want to. Do it if you feel like, but don't do it. Don't feel like obliged to do anything. Be yourself. Try and be, as Ori says, oh God, I can't believe I'm quoting Ori as Ori says, be the best version of yourself. And all of that. The second thing is actually very, very interesting. Am I seeing it more and more? Yeah, because in companies, and this is how society works, right? When a marginal group of people gets little bit of, say, piece of the pie or whatever, suddenly the majority is saying, oh ho, now are you being hired only for this? It's because the majority is feeling so threatened that they cannot imagine that there are more. In their understanding, there can be room for only one woman at the table, or the one token queer person. The moment they become more, people feel very scared. People say, are we hiring all these women and queers on merit, or now are we only going to hire them now? And oh God, what will happen, and all of that, right? That is just, so I think then organizations, the ones who are working on this, we have to work very hard. Unfortunately, poor straight men, we have to help them understand because of course we have to help them to do so many other things. So in organizations where this has not been an issue, those organizations focus very much on allyship. They role model behavior of straight men, which is good allies. So they kind of defang all the men who are going to criticize you. It's mostly straight men only. Sorry if there are any nice straight men in the audience, we love you, but sometimes you all discriminate, no? So then they're defanged, because when you include them in this thing of allyship, you have to think a lot about what is a good ally. I am an ally. I love my queer colleague. You role model allyship as a good behavior to kind of defang that, oh, are these people increasing and are they whatever and so on. So these questions do come. These questions never come when you're hiring more straight men, by the way. When you hire more straight men, no one says, oh, so many more straight men coming. Oh God, are they being hired on merit? But the moment you start hiring more women, more queers, more trans, more anyone, people start questioning this. This is just the way the world exists. We have to now, we have to do this also. And then be fabulous. It's very hard. We have to do this work now also of like helping them understand and help defang them and help them work through all of this. But now, such is life. That is why 2 pieces of dark chocolate, it's got things in it that like really like calm you.
Can I just...
So we have Chandan, and then you. Two questions.
Here and then.
Hi, thanks Parmesh, and thanks Pushpesh for the discussion. So obviously that was a very productive back and forth, tension, but we need that.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you, Parmesh, is that what really caught my ear during your talk was words like strategic, short-term, jugaad. I have to work my way through, negotiate these things, big things that will work at that moment, which is how a lot of South Asia also operates, Now, while while going on about whether inclusiveness or diversity has worked here less and in the global north more, but are there lessons that you think this system that is in India can offer to, issues back to the north, the way in which you've grappled with these things, about strategy, about like using points like family and all of these things, which are out of the ambit of the queer discourse. But you've used them because the moment required it, as opposed to a very linear arrangement which the global north kind of prescribes, Can we look back and say, hello, these are lessons that you can learn from us?
Completely. I think there are, and you've hit upon one of them. How do we incorporate the idea of family in workplaces? Something, because the global north is very much, there is work and there is life, and there needs to be balance, and work is work, and I'm not family and this and that. But the truth is, all our lives are messy, and we bring our families to work and we take our work home, and these frameworks really whatever. So I think in Queeristan, I call it in loco parentis. I think it is the duty of organizations to act in loco parentis, because people are sending their kids, people are sending people to organizations to work. You need to create rules, you need to create safe spaces, you need to give benefits, you need to whatever, you need to act like what good parents need to be acting as, which means safe space, which means opportunities for growth, which means whatever. So I think one of it is like how do you intersect some of these personal, emotional things into workplaces. The global north is very much about not bringing emotion in. I think we need to bring emotion, because people's hearts and minds do not change with data. Data validates, data will validate an emotional connect you have. How much ever numbers I can give a CEO of the companies I work with saying hire more women is nothing compared to a video I will shoot with his daughter saying, Papa, you work at such a big company, tomorrow I'll also grow up, you really want the world to be like this? And little crying. It's amazing, right? So, but that's my point, right? So I think we need to, what can we teach? Emotion has so much place. Emotional blackmail or emotional manipulation has so much place in the corporate world. We can certainly teach that to the other parts of the world because we are like this only, this is how we are as people. The second is, I think, this quest for perfection. I think, and this maybe it comes from jugaad, it comes from scarcity. I think what we all have is, let's just go in a direction and make it work and we'll figure it out on the way. Whereas in other parts of the world, people want everything sorted. We don't know. Like, we don't know. Will we be around tomorrow? Will we, we're like, chalo, we'll find out. I think this hustle mentality, which I think we have more in the global south, maybe it comes from necessity, or maybe it's a strategy that we've perfected over the years. But I think it's something that we can. I think people in other parts of the world are forgetting how to hustle in the quest for like a perfect solution. And this is what, so I don't think this was back and forth. I think we were talking about the same thing, but from various perspectives, right? What Pushpesh was outlining an ideal world, and I want that ideal world, but I live in an imperfect world. So how to get from here to there is a hustle. And, should it be a hustle that some of us are, to answer your question, some of us are doing more of it. Some of us have the burden of hustling more. What to do? But to get to there, we'll have to do something to get there. And I think the way we are getting about, the way we are reaching it here is a more interesting and creative way than the way, say, other parts of the world are reaching it. Having said that, would I like the same protections? Would I like the same laws? Would I like the same, so many of the other things that people in other parts of the world have? Of course. Of course. We'll mingle after this and we'll do talks and selfies and everything after that.
Hi Parmesh, I'm Ekta.
Please try to be brief and precise.
Yes. I'm Ekta and I identify as an ally. I'm here because I help a lot of domestic violence survivors, and we've seen that parental abuse is very, very common. As an ally, a lot of times I get frozen out of the queer community groups. I find it difficult. And also, I find it difficult to get sensitization help. So these are my two questions. Where do I find help on self-sensitization, because I want to help someone who comes to me and I don't want to turn them away. And the second question is, are there support groups or people that I can reach out to during the course of my work?
Excellent. There are more than 250 books on being queer in India as of now. Read all of them. They're all amazing. There's autobiographies, there's business books, there's ethnographies, there's fiction, there's like teenage romance. It's great fun. So read. There are so many movies all across in multiple languages all across. So I mean, there's so much that, and we are growing. How lucky you are. Because 25 years ago, when I was like trying to get queer material in a pre-internet world or whatever, it was very hard. Very few books, very few. You're in an age of Netflix and Amazon Prime. You're in an age of Heartstopper and Muthan and Super Deluxe and like everyone from Ayushman to Mammootty playing queers. What a world. So like absorb yourself in it, how amazing it is. So one is for sensitization, so please, there's no excuse. It's all around us. But in terms of number two, where to find resources, also, so lucky all you young queers are and non-queers and allies are. Every state, every city in this country now has a queer organ. In Hyderabad, Tashi was here now, there is the QT Center. Please get on the metro and go to it. Amazing. Please give money, please give time. They need both. That is just one of many organizations in this city itself. Anywhere you go, there is an amazing queer organization which has resources, which is working with the community. And whatever you want, they will give you. You want talent, they will give you. You want insights, they will give you. Please pay them for some of this. You want ideas, they will give you. You want connections with the government, they will give you. So, we actually are very well networked right now, right? All the way from Manipur, all the way to South, East, West, there's very whatever. So, it's actually quite exciting. So, to be a good ally, and that's for you and for everyone else, there are two kinds of allyship. One is just allyship and one is active allyship. To be an active ally, we want your time, your money, and your friendship. Because then that's active ally saying like, I love you and here's how I can help. And for that, there are incredible queer organizations across. Join in. LGBTQIA, be that A.
Yeah, you talked about straight men, like taking up all the space.
Some of them are my friends also.
Yeah, of course, mine too. I wanted to ask about gay men taking up all the space and, representing all of us. and like that, and the tokenism of like having a lesbian or a trans man in the panel. And related to that, you talked about trans inclusion. I wanted to ask, like, to what extent are the trans men included in that? And besides that, how well the corporate or the queer movement, you said about like being there for each other and all. So how well do the corporate and the queer movement recognize the fluidity? Like there are different categories also, right? So I wanted to ask about that.
So more and more, I'll just take two and one. For the one thing, we should talk to the organizers, which I think you should take up and say next year you should have more diverse panels, more representative panels and all. I think it's very good. I think, and more queerness as well. Is this the only queer panel this time? Maybe no, we should have more and more. HLF should have more and more. So we can talk about that. Completely agree. It's something that we started doing so many years ago when we were curating. Well, I used to run a cultural space before. And if we would do anything queer, we would make sure that you start with a trans person, then lesbian, final gay man as well. So I think that's a blend that everyone should take as well within this. Spot on, gay men take up too much time and space. So completely agree on that. And let's find the organizers after that and tell them that next time you should curate within the community also in a more representative manner. For the 2 and 3, you'll be actually quite surprised that there is actually a very nuanced understanding. In fact, more so in corporations than in other parts, because corporations work with community organizations, consultants, etc., and making their policies. So a lot of on paper, it's actually incredible in terms of understanding trans women, trans men, what to pay for in terms of surgery, what is cosmetic, what is non-cosmetic, and people follow many, whether it's WPATH, whether it's India, people follow many guidelines. So this is actually great nuance understanding when these laws are being made, and also when these laws are being, when these benefits are actually flowing to the employees as well. It's actually quite interesting if you look at doctors also. There's a bunch of doctors across, again, in terms of surgeries, etc. There are actually very good networks that are being formed in terms of this. Does this understanding translate over to the lay person in an organization? No. But if you happen to be trans, working in an organization which has these facilities, it's actually interesting and quite wonderful. It's not as horrible as you might think as well. So it's actually, but it's for all of us to actually make it more and more. Yeah. Thank you.
The conversations can continue over if you're
Okay. So we have to wind up. Thank you, Parmesh,
Pushpesh.
for this conversation and creating certain sensibility, bringing certain sensibility to the corporate when our welfare state or neoliberal welfare state doesn't have much to offer to the queer and trans community. There is something happening in corporate space, and people like Parmesh are being instrumental in doing that, which is very commendable. Thank you very much.